Only dito po New Zealand.
So we're going to go ahead and open it up to the audience first to ask any questions that they might have. And yeah, so if anyone has any questions, please bring them on. All right, if no one has any questions, I have some questions prepared.
Great, really? Nobody has any questions?
I'll ask one.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
All right. Would you like me to stand? Is it okay if I sit? Cool. Awesome. All right. So my name is Vincent Garcia. First of all, thank you for coming, for speaking to us. Well, my question is that, so by way of background, I'm originally from the South Bronx myself. I lived in New York the majority of my life before coming here to Jersey to go to college and join the military and then go to law school afterwards. And when my curiosity is that you spoke about how our reality and our existence of growing up as minorities in the urban community of living in a lot of times areas that are forgotten by the remainder of the world, that they don't really understand where we come from and the day-to-day things that we do. However, that I found that even by going to a different state or by going to a different country in some ways because of the military, a lot of people, no matter how much you tell them, no matter how much you try to articulate in a way what we go through, what the struggle is, no one really understands until you experience it. So I'm wondering, how can we bridge that divide, or how do you think we can bridge that divide with police officers, with even military members are afraid, or other people in our communities, if we can't give them the first-hand experience of what that's like and what that feels like? Like, how can we fix that?
Well, I think that we first have to make them realize, some people don't realize there's a problem. Like you was just saying, no matter where you go, and we tell our stories, they think it's just a story. They haven't lived this, so they can't appreciate or not appreciate, that's the wrong word. They can't emphasize with us how we actually feel of what has happened to us in our life. I think we have to get a group together, not of color per se, we have to get of other nationalities who doesn't experience this and make them realize what we are actually going through. And once we can make that small group realize, they will spread the word, I think. I think they can make others listen, because I think we have a lot of closed ears or deaf ears to what we're actually going through. And sometimes it may hit home with them. And then they'll say, wow, now I know. But it hits us every day, all day long. And this is what we need to stop. This is, I'm not really sure of what's the right answer or what we should do, but this is my way of thinking, how we just got to get people to listen and to understand this is real.
Hi. Ms. Carr, thanks for coming and sharing with us. Newark has just organized its first civilian complaint review board. Hasn't started to work yet. I wonder if New York has had one for quite some time, gone through a lot of changes. I wonder if you had contact with them and what that contact was like. What worked, if anything? What didn't work, if anything?
It's funny you should ask that question because just about 3 weeks ago, I had gotten a letter, which the letter really never got to me until it reached the papers. And they actually want to bring charges against Officer Panelists because they said he did restrict Eric's breathing. He did apply a chokehold. So we asked to have a meeting with the Civilian Review Board, and they granted us that meeting. And they were telling us what the different procedures was going to be, being that they stepped out, because see, the police departments don't want this at all. But being that they already put into motion that Officer Pandeleo and those other 5 officers did do something wrong, now they have to address the issue. But it's a lot of challenges. They told us they're going through a lot of challenges. First, now they have to submit it. Now it has to be okay. And now, then they can bring charges. And even if they bring charges, the police officers, the police department doesn't have to accept these charges, and it's just on a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape. But they did take the first step to try to, exonerate this. So we did hear from them, and when we talk to them, they're telling us that they're gonna go all the way with this, despite the challenges. And I just heard a few minutes ago about the Newark review board. The lady who was in here before, oh, there she is over there. She was just telling me that if you get it passed, that this should be a very strong instrument that you could use against the police officer. And I hope it goes through.
How you doing? My name is Dr. Jalil Shakur. First of all, I want to say to you, Ms. Carr, you're a courageous woman for standing up for this issue, because a lot of women who have experienced their children being murdered here in America and even throughout the world don't have the courage, nor do they have the strength to stand up after their child was murdered by the police. So I give a hand to you for your courageous efforts to speak out on this particular issue.
Thank you.
My question is, the young man who videotaped your son being murdered by this particular police officer has been incarcerated. Is there any movement towards freeing this young man, and what is the actual charges of this individual for videotaping your son?
Yes, there is a movement. We do a movement to fill the courtrooms when he did come to trial. And right after my son's death, my husband reached out to him. We found out who he was, Ramsey Order, and we embraced him and we tried to get him, he was listening to a lot of people. Sometimes I'll say he was listening to a lot of wrong people. People was giving him bad advice. But we still, so right afterwards, as you know, he got arrested. Now, his family went down there to try to get him out. They wouldn't release him, and the family reached out to me, which, I never really tell people this, but I went down there, and I'm the one who got him out the first time when he was arrested. And so after that, he was arrested again. They were saying he had a gun. And if you know Ramsey, like a lot of the young guys, they wears his pants below, that droops on his hips. And we even said, well, how could he hide a gun in there? Because it would drop right through his pants. And later on, we found out about him that the young lady who he was arrested with was one of the police officers' daughter from the 202 precinct in New York. Nothing happened to her. She was let go, and he was kept. And every time this is brought out, it's like almost dismissed. The police officer says, oh, that was his daughter, but he can't do nothing. She's out there in the street, But I just think there was something behind that when he got arrested. Why was this a police officer's daughter that he got arrested with, right? But I keep up with him. I write him. I send him a little something to put in his, his, what do you call it, commissary, yes. So, and I told him, he asked me to come and see him, and I was, and then I looked up where he was. I said, my goodness, I think it was like, it's in New York, but it's like 9 hours away. So I says, one day I said, I'll probably have to take a plane up there to go that. But yes, I do keep up with him because to me, he is the real hero in this, because if he hadn't videoed, it would have been a completely different story. In fact, there was a completely different story before they found out that there was a video. The police said that They went to arrest him. My son had a heart attack, and that's why he was on the ground. And everybody who was there, coincided with what Plan DeLeo said, until they found out it was a video. And they did nothing. All they did was give the officers immunity when they went before the grand jury. It was just a joke. The grand jury was a real joke that they had in Staten Island. This is why I'm hoping that the DOJ, who has the case now, I hope that we get justice with them, at least showing that they violated Eric's civil rights, his human rights, So that's where it is. Ramsey, we are still in touch with them.
I was gonna ask, there's different pieces of it,
Yes.
but from a legal perspective, how do we change the grand jury's process? I know one of them is to get ask for an independent prosecutor through the state, but every single case, at least a large number of cases in the state of New Jersey, the grand jury always finds the officer not guilty. Even when there's proof. In one particular case, there's a video circulating.
Yeah, well, there was a video in my son's case,
Yeah.
and they didn't see, what everybody else saw.
With the grand jury, I was going to ask, why isn't there why is the grand jury one closed? For some of the attorneys who might be in here, especially. And the other thing, why isn't there someone representing the victim
I know,
in that grand jury process? Because there's always a prosecutor.
always.
In most instances, there's a relationship between the prosecutor and the police department.
Of course.
And so on.
That's who they depend on.
How do we begin to change that kind of stuff?
Well, we were asking that same question because even with my son, not only was the grand jury closed, it was a secret grand jury. We never knew when it was convening. We never knew anything until it was all over. The only little information we ever had gotten is if someone was called to the grand jury, and they was telling us they were in there 5 minutes, and the jurors wasn't even really paying them any mind. He says, you're not supposed to have your cell phone when you're in the grand jury. That wasn't true. They had newspapers. Because I know I've been on the grand jury. None of this is supposed to be allowed. And they were saying it was just awful, the things that was happening. So they probably had got prior instructions like what to do in the first place. This is what I say because they tell me none of the rules were followed. And then then it was no disclosure. We couldn't get anything to find out why this police officer wasn't indicted. But when he had his day in court, in front of the grand jury, they said he was in there for like an hour and a half.
Yeah, so to add a little bit to that, so grand juries are traditionally closed, but every state can really kind of make its own rules about how it wants to run its criminal justice process. But it is very standard that they're closed in all cases and kept secret in all cases. So as Ms. Carr just suggested, there were some efforts to get the records released from the grand jury proceedings against Officer Pantaleo. But those were unsuccessful, and it went all the way to the Court of Appeals of New York, which is the highest court in New York. And they basically said, we have this long tradition of secrecy for grand juries, and there has to be a really kind of extraordinary reason to breach that privacy. But she's also already alluded to some of the ways that the grand jury process might be improved. So as she mentioned, in New York, there's now an executive order that says that in a case where someone dies in custody and is unarmed, then the state attorney general can bring that proceeding instead of the local DA, because what happens so often, as you said, is that the prosecutors work so closely with the cops day in and day out. There's a very tight relationship between the local DAs and the police departments. And so the executive order is kind of a small attempt to get around that, to at least bring in outside prosecutors who are not working with, say, the NYPD or whatever local police department you're talking about day in and day out. But it's really something that would require change kind of state by state. In some states it's also in the Constitution, the state Constitution.
But the grand jury, the secrecy of the grand jury process is something that's extraordinarily frustrating and upsetting in these kinds of cases where the public is so interested and hungry to know what's happening. And it's again, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, it's again one of those kind of unfortunate, really technical legal rules that is very hard to get around unless you change the law from the top, usually by going through the legislature.
And that's why I said we have to change the law. That's the only way we can, get any kind of justice, any kind of accountability. With one of our cases with the executive order for the special prosecutor, we do have a police officer that is going to trial. And that's with the Delron Small case, the one where the police officer shot him on the 4th of July, not the 4th of July past, but a year ago. So he is in court, he has been indicted, he has been charged, so we're going to see what goes with that. And his case is convening on the 18th of this month. He goes back to court. We went last month when they first was charging him, and we filled the courtrooms to let them, see our presence. So we're just going to see, and this have come through the executive order that we demanded that Governor Cuomo signed. So we are doing something.
You're doing a lot. No doubt about it.
Do you think it's possible to change police culture around how they view black bodies?
Well, this is
That's
all.
an easy question.
This is all in the process. This is what we're trying to do. But police officers have a code of silence. They think that they are above the law. They can do what they want, especially when they come into communities of color. So we are going to have to, we got a lot of work to do. We don't know how we're going to change it, but we are destined to change it because we can't let them keep coming in our communities, killing up our children, and then just walk away. And they go home to their families every night, kiss their babies, and love their wives, and we're home suffering. So that's why we have all these different meetings. We have people coming together. They have different sessions. That's why I go throughout the country. They said, we're having a meeting on this, we're having a meeting on this. I says, wow, maybe, we could connect, we can network, and we can find common ground how to rectify this. And it's not going to be an easy situation. But we're going to let them know that we're out there. We're not going to let it rest.
And just to add to that, and part of the reason why your work is so critical and so important is because I think we've seen over time when it comes to police violence that legal rules are often not enough to affect change. And so, there was a rule on the books that said no chokeholds should be employed by any officer of the NYPD. Yet we see what happened to your son. More than 20 years ago, there was someone who was killed with a chokehold in the Bronx. Yeah, exactly. Anthony Baez was killed by a cop who he annoyed because he was playing football with his brother in the street, and they hit his car.
In front of his own house.
Yeah.
And they tried to make a story of it that they were, what were they doing? They were about to rob. They was in front of their own property doing nothing but playing football.
Yeah.
And he came and choked the young man to death.
Yeah, and that officer was prosecuted. Obviously, there's a lot of attention to whether police officers are prosecuted. That officer, Officer Lavati, was criminally convicted in federal court. There's this ban that was put into place by the NYPD, and yet still, we see very unfortunately, tragically, that cases like these continue to happen and lives continue to be taken.
Just like a Kai Gurley in Brooklyn in the pink houses. The officer was tried and convicted and served no jail time. So what do we do? You get tried, you get charged, you get convicted, and then there's no jail time. you go free, you know, you go on with your life. But our life is ruined. Our life, there's a void in it, and there's nothing that they want to do. Sometimes they want to throw you some dollars to tell you to shut up. Oh, this, you take this. No, no money value can be put on a life. You took a life, and now you want to throw dollars. No, I told them. Then they want you to silence you. They want you not to say anything about the, what's going on with the case. But I tell them, the more money you would give me, the more I'm going to talk. So don't try to shut me up.
I mean, like, I think that part of the problem is the standard that they use, right? Like, I think that the officer just needs to show that they felt like they were being harmed, like they were being threatened, right?
Yes,
So
that's
like,
it.
what constitutes a threat to a police officer at this
Anything.
point? Is it anything?
Anything.
Bulge in your pocket?
A gesture is a threat.
And so I feel like that's the problem. Like, how do you define a threat? Like, does a police officer feel more threatened by a normal citizen than an average person would?
And they have the gun, remember. They feel threatened, but we are ordinary citizens, and most of the time, the ones they killed have nothing. But they felt threatened. They're threatened by our color. They're threatened by our culture. It's not a threat. That's just a word they use, I believe. They feel threatened. They don't feel a threat. They know that they can go in, they could come in and violate us, and nothing is going to be done. Why should you feel threatened by us and you have the gun? You come into communities, you go, like one case in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, Ramarley Graham. He went into his own house, he just went in, door closed behind him, they were following, he didn't even know they were following him. They surrounded the house and made sure they broke into the house, got in there, threatened the landlord to let him up to the apartment, killed him in front of his grandmother and baby brother. So what threat was that to them? And when we went to court on that one, and when they said what the police officer should have did, first of all, the police officer was supposed to be in uniform. They established that. None of them had on uniforms. If you think that someone is in there with a gun, you were supposed to barricade the area and then call your superior at the desk. None of that was done. So what was that? They wanted to kill the boy. They didn't follow any protocol. And the police officer didn't go to jail, but after he didn't know what the sentence was going to be, so he resigned. He conveniently resigned. But it's awful. It's awful what's going on out there. And I just want to see it stop. It's just heartbreaking, for my son, of course, but just to see other people also suffer like me. And a lot of the names and the faces, you don't know their nameless, they're faceless, because maybe they never even got a write-up in the paper about what happened to their son. So that's why we, the ones who did get coverage, and we are high profile, we have to speak for the nameless and the faceless, because they suffer just like we do.
So, both race and class are issues in this case. And we're going back to Lady Mendez. So Mendez is a person of color and was homeless, living in a shack when he was shot by the police. He wrote an op-ed in the Daily News saying that racial justice and economic justice go hand in hand. What role do you believe economic injustices played in the events leading to your son's murder?
Well, like you said, they both go hand in hand because economic justice, we know that we don't have economic justice. The jobs that we get, they don't pay what they should pay, or we are denied jobs that we are well qualified for, but they won't accept us because of our color, which is very wrong. I know, like in my son's case, my son was educated. I sent him to Ohio to college. He had asthma, but I know a lot of times when he would go for a job, they would not accept him because a lot of jobs he couldn't handle because of his, the asthmatic, a lot of the fumes, but he was really adamant about cars, he always wanted to be entrepreneur of foreign cars, fixing them, having, many garages around the country. This was his dream from like when he was 12 years old. But with his health, he really couldn't do that type of work. He had other jobs. He worked for the Parks Department. He worked for Greyhound. He worked for different, places. But then, with his setback, when he was very discouraged, being that he couldn't do what he really wanted to do with his life. And he was selling cigarettes, selling Lucy's, to support his family. I used to tell him a lot of times, because I used to always help him with his family all the time. But he really was a proud person. He didn't really want my help. He says, "Ma, I could do it." But with the police harassing you about selling cigarettes, they would lock him up, probably overnight usually. Sometimes they give him a $500 bail and let him out. But he was economically challenged. He wasn't educational challenged because my son, he could hold conversations with the best of them. Because in school he was a for history, he was a fanatic. He knew everything about history. Even one time he had served some jail time, he learned all about the law. He quote the law to you. You can do this and you can't do this, and and everybody would ask me, "Wow, is Eric studying law?" I said, "Wow, you didn't know he's a lawyer." So, but if we were treated correctly when we go for jobs, if we were treated correctly when we try to pursue careers, a lot of times things would not, a lot of things wouldn't happen that has happened to a lot of our people. But we are so rejected when it comes to equality. We're not equal in anything, no matter what our skills are. We always got to take the back seat. And even if we if we accept the job, we're accepting it for less than what we're worth. And that's not fair to us. I have been blessed to have a decent job all my life, since I've come out of high school and out of college. But most people can't make that claim. I was able to take care of 3 children, I would say 6 because I raised my brother's children, on my one salary. I don't know how I did it, but I did it. But most people in my position probably would have had to go on welfare. But as a kid, I refused to go on welfare because my father always talked against that. We have to broaden our horizons. We have to strive, even though we have to strive twice as hard as the white population. But if we have the know-how, we have to express it. He used to always drive this into us, like, You don't sit back and let people tell you that you can't do it when you know that you can do it. So, you know, that's why I used to tell my son the same thing, but I know he was a little discouraged that he couldn't do what he knew how to do. So, you know, that was the economic and the, you know, disadvantage that he had, you know, along with all the other violations that they, you know, the things that they do to us. And it's sad, but, you know, we are always striving to make that better.
All right, so I'm gonna bring it over to Alexis to further explain the case. And so, do you believe that the current Fourth Amendment jurisprudence protects the individual? How can courts approach the Fourth Amendment analysis in a way that vindicates society's interest in limiting the use of excessive force?
Well, I guess it depends on which individual you're talking about. So if you're talking about individual police officers, then yeah, they're pretty well protected. Because we have, to Farah's point, and Ms. Carr's point, this objective reasonableness standard, which is really often problematic. So, you know, and I think this Mendez case is a really good example of that, where there's somebody who's completely innocent, who has done nothing wrong, who's laying in his own bed, and gets shot and gets his leg amputated. And as of right now, I think his recovery is in doubt, not his physical recovery, but his monetary recovery for the case. And it's because these standards are really not written from the perspective of looking at the victim and whether they should be made whole. So there's the objective reasonableness standard, and Farah, you asked earlier about defining threats and defining being in reasonable fear of your life. And the truth of the matter is that there isn't a ton of law on that. And really mostly gets decided in jury rooms if you can get to a jury. So both in the criminal context and also in civil cases where somebody has been a victim of a use of force and sues or their estate sues, there's not really a kind of very clear articulation of what's reasonable and what's not. There are some cases where there are kind of more clear rules. So for example, if someone is, say, handcuffed and totally subdued, and someone just decides to start shooting at them, yes, that is unreasonable. There's also the fleeing felon rule, which went before the Supreme Court back in 1985, so that if you are, so in that case, there was, I think, a 14-year-old boy in Memphis who was accused of burglary, and the police officers honed in on him, and he was fleeing, trying to jump over a fence in the backyard, and he got shot by the cops who were pursuing him. And at the time, Tennessee had a state statute that specifically said basically that if you were accused of a felony and you were fleeing, then the use of force was authorized. So that was overturned, thankfully, in Tennessee v. Garner. But the law is really vague, generally, on this point. And the qualified immunity doctrine that I mentioned briefly earlier also goes a really long way to protecting police officers, so that if it's not clearly established that something violates the Fourth Amendment, then they'll be off the hook. And so that's why in the Mendez case, the fact that the failure to knock and announce is really the kind of core of what led to this shooting. There hadn't been a case like that before, where someone failed to knock and announce and then shot them, and then an officer was found liable. And so because there was not that prior case that made it abundantly clear to all officers that you cannot fail to knock and announce and then shoot someone because you failed to knock and announce, then the officer gets immunity on that claim as well. So the law is, I think, very clearly kind of weighted to protect officers in many ways, certainly civilly and criminally for the reasons we've been talking about in terms of grand jury and prosecutions. And there's a lot of work to be done. But as much as I love being a lawyer, I really think this is an area where it's important to look beyond the law. And that's part of why I'm so happy that Ms. Carr was able to join us today, because the law will not save us in this regard at all. And there's a lot of work to be done outside of the legal realm.
All right, so we'll bring it back over to Ms. Carr. Oh, so sorry. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up, and we want to give a huge round of applause to our speakers, Ms. Carr. And so it's on the second floor.
No, right here.
Oh, we're in leisure. So we're going to be having our reception. There will be wine and little snacks. So please join us. And again, just we'll be awarding our Art Nicer Award. So please join.
I don't know.